What if you had only 45 minutes left? Not in your life, but in your window to hear the voice of God, to respond to His call, to say yes before the door quietly begins to close. Not because He stops calling, but because you stop listening. The signs are around you. The hand is already reaching. The question is not if you're being called. The question is, are you awake enough to answer? The idea that divine election is a mystery, not a privilege, strikes at the very heart of many misunderstandings surrounding spiritual chosenness. It is tempting, almost instinctive, to view being chosen by God as a badge of honor, a reward for virtue, or a recognition of spiritual superiority. But such a view misses the entire nature of divine grace. In truth, the very act of being chosen is an unfathomable act of mercy rather than a human achievement. God does not choose based on merit, as if the soul had earned favor by its moral summe. His choices operate outside our systems of worth, and to be chosen is not to be better. It is to be more accountable. The chosen are not selected because they shine the brightest, but often because they are willing to be broken, molded, and used for purposes far greater than their understanding. One cannot fully comprehend divine election without first surrendering the illusion of human control. We live in a world that celebrates autonomy and self-made identity. We define ourselves by our choices, our goals, our victories. But God's choosing interrupts that narrative. It says, "Before you understood me, I understood you. Before you saw me, I saw you. Before you called out, I had already spoken your name." That is not an award ceremony, it is a divine summons. And such a calling humbles rather than exalts. Imagine being chosen not for your strength, but for your emptiness. Not for your wisdom, but for your willingness to listen. Not for your purity, but for your need to be cleansed. The world says the worthy are rewarded, but grace says the unworthy are called. When we look at history, the ones God chose rarely fit the world's expectations. A shepherd boy overlooked by his own father. A stammering exile called to lead a nation. A teenage girl in a forgotten town. A fisherman who would deny his Lord 3 times. They were not chosen because they were flawless, eloquent, or strong. They were chosen because God saw something deeper, something beyond their resume, beyond their culture's approval. And in being chosen, they did not rise to platforms of pride, but fell to their knees in awe. This is what divine election does. It does not elevate for applause, it crushes for glory. It refines in fire, yet many today misunderstand this. They treat being chosen as if it means being favored above others in some final sense. As if God's affection were a competition and His calling a trophy. But the chosen are not chosen to be comfortable. They are not given privilege for self-celebration. They are chosen to serve, to suffer, to carry burdens no one else will carry, to say yes when others walk away. They are chosen to be signs, living signs, that point to a kingdom not of this world. Their lives may look ordinary or even troubled, but beneath the surface is the work of God shaping eternity through them. And the mystery lies here. We cannot explain why He chooses as He does. His reasons are not ours. He sees the end from the beginning. He knows what each life can bear, what each soul can become. We often protest, "Why me?" And the silence that follows is not indifference but depth. It is God's way of saying, "Trust me." The chosen must walk by faith more than most, because their path will often be lonelier, their battles fiercer, their discipline stricter. This is not favoritism, it is preparation. What makes divine election so humbling is that it reveals both God's love and our unworthiness in the same breath. To be chosen is to be confronted with the terrifying grace of a God who sees all and still calls your name. It breaks the heart with gratitude and fills it with trembling. It is no small thing to be chosen. It is not a thing to be flaunted. It is a thing to be guarded, nurtured, and lived out with a sacred seriousness. Many are called, but few respond. The chosen ones are not the only ones invited. They are simply the ones who say yes, and keep saying yes, even when it costs them everything. Time is a strange thing. It moves so steadily, so silently, that most of us forget it's moving at all. We live as though there's always more of it, like a well that never dries or a road that never ends. But time is not ours to own. It's only ours to use. The phrase, 45 minutes left, is not simply a dramatic alarm. It is a spiritual metaphor, a call to recognize the urgency of the hour, not in fear, but in awakening. There is a moment when the soul must look up from its distractions and realize that the window is narrowing, not because God is withdrawing, but because we are drifting. The heart that does not respond eventually stops hearing. The soul that postpones will soon forget what it meant to feel. The danger lies not in time itself, but in how we treat it. We assume the door will always be open, the whisper of God always audible. But the reality is much more sobering. There comes a point when procrastination becomes rejection, when delay becomes denial, when waiting becomes walking away. God's voice does not always thunder. Sometimes it only speaks once, and that whisper is our only chance to respond. 45 minutes. That is all we think we have. Perhaps less, perhaps more. But the truth remains we do not know. And what we do not know should not make us anxious, but awake. God does not operate on our clocks, yet He enters time to reach us. He does not need reminders, appointments, or alarms. He comes when it is right, and expects us to be ready. There are moments when eternity presses so close that you can almost feel it breathing against your skin. In those moments, something within you stirs, a quiet unrest, a feeling that you are meant for more than routine, more than survival, more than the noise of the world. That unrest is not coincidence. It is the voice of God knocking gently. And if you don't answer, it may pass by, not because He is cruel, but because your heart grows dull with every delay. The urgency is not about the end of your life, though that may be part of it. The urgency is about the softening of your heart, the shaping of your soul. Every time you say, "Not now," you place another brick in the wall between you and the one who calls you. And soon the voice becomes harder to hear, the desire to respond becomes weaker, the conviction grows faint. Time is not just about days and hours. It is about openness. The person who feels the pull of God today and puts it off until tomorrow may find that tomorrow never speaks again in quite the same way. We are told that the Spirit will not always strive with man. That means God does not force Himself upon those who continually turn away. There is mercy, yes, oceans of it. But mercy still invites a decision. Love still demands a response. The notion of 45 minutes left is not a countdown to wrath, but a picture of what it means to have one last chance, one more opportunity before the door begins to shut. And not because the hand of God moves quickly, but because the heart of man hardens so easily. Think of the thief on the cross. For most of his life, he mocked, stole, and ran. But in the final minutes, he recognized the Messiah beside him. And his plea, "Remember me," was enough to change his eternity. That was grace. That was urgency met with surrender. Now think of the others who watched miracles, heard truth, and yet went home unmoved. Time ran out, not because they died, but because they stopped caring. There are signs everywhere, not in fire from the sky, but in quiet encounters. A stranger's words, a sleepless night, a question that won't go away. These are invitations. They are like small lanterns placed on your path. You don't need to see the whole road. You just need to take the next step. But that step must be taken while the light still shines. Because the light doesn't wait forever. The invitation doesn't hang in the air untouched. The Spirit moves. And when He moves on, something is lost. The world tells you time is yours. But every tick of the clock is borrowed. Every heartbeat is grace extended. What you do with it reveals everything about what you believe. The moment to turn is now, not because fear demands it, but because love offers it. Not because judgment threatens, but because a door stands open. And that door may not remain open forever. God speaks in signs, but we often expect spectacles. The human heart, shaped by stories of grandeur and dazzled by miracles, imagines that when God moves, it will be with overwhelming force. Earthquakes, thunder, parting skies. But that expectation reveals more about us than Him. It shows how easily we can miss the very presence of God simply because it doesn't conform to our imagination. He rarely shouts. More often, He whispers. He does not always send fire. Sometimes He sends silence. The signs of God are woven into the quiet corners of our lives. An unanswered longing, a sudden stillness in the soul, a tear that rises for no clear reason, a word spoken by someone who couldn't have known what you needed to hear. These are His signs, and they require a different kind of sight, the kind that sees with the heart. The problem is not that God is not speaking. The problem is that we have forgotten how to listen. We are surrounded by so much noise, both internal and external, that the divine becomes nearly inaudible. It's not that the signs are too small, it's that our senses are too crowded. We want heaven to break open in flashing light, but God chooses to reveal Himself through the slow, steady unfolding of providence. His signs are more like breadcrumbs than billboards. They invite attention, not assumption. You cannot spot them with arrogance. You must be still enough to see. Many people look back at their lives and recognize signs they missed, not because they weren't there, but because they were too busy or too proud to notice. That moment when your plans were interrupted and you were forced to sit in silence. That conversation you didn't expect to have but couldn't forget. That unexplainable tug that led you down a different path, only to discover something you didn't know you needed. All of these are signs. God is not in the business of showmanship, He is in the business of formation. And formation is slow, quiet, and deeply personal. When we ask for signs, we often want confirmation without transformation. We want God to prove something to us, but not to require anything of us. That is not the way signs work. The signs of God are not for entertainment. They are invitations. They are not simply meant to be seen, but followed. And following them costs something. It may cost your pride, your plans, your comfort, but it leads to life. The Israelites had the pillar of fire, but it moved. And when it moved, they had to move with it. God's signs are not landmarks for you to admire. They are guideposts for you to obey. It is possible to be surrounded by signs and still miss them. The Pharisees saw miracles, heard divine words, watched healings, but they asked for more signs. not because they were searching, but because they were resisting. Their hearts were not hungry for truth, only for control. That's the danger of always demanding something louder or bigger from God. It's not a sign problem. It's a heart problem. A heart that demands spectacle will overlook the sacred in the ordinary. A heart that demands thunder will dismiss the whisper. Even when Jesus walked the earth, the signs were subtle. A baby in a manger, a man touching lepers, a carpenter telling stories. For those with open eyes, these were the very fingerprints of God. For those waiting for something grander, they were nothing more than curiosities. The signs of God are not meant to impress. They are meant to lead. They are not decorations on the journey. They are the journey. And they are given to those who are willing to look again, to pause, to feel, to question, to be interrupted. There is something sacred about interruption. God often speaks through the very things we consider inconvenient or strange. That detour in your plans, that relationship that didn't work out, that ache you can't seem to shake. These are signs, not punishments, but pointers. They are moments where God says, look here, not there. Listen now, not later. And if you do, you begin to notice that the divine isn't far off. It's all around you, waiting to be seen, waiting to be followed. To walk by faith means to learn this way of seeing. It means recognizing that signs are rarely about certainty. They are about invitation. They do not answer every question. They open a door, and you must decide whether to walk through it. Being chosen by God is not an invitation to ease but to endurance. The assumption that divine favor results in comfort is not only misguided but dangerous. When God sets His hand upon a soul, it does not guarantee a life free of suffering. It guarantees a life shaped by it. Those who are chosen are not called to lie in green pastures alone. They are led into valleys, deserts, storms, and silence. They are not clothed in luxury, but often in loneliness. The path of the chosen is not lit by applause, but by obedience. To be called is to be prepared, and preparation is rarely gentle. It is a refining fire, not a soft wind. It breaks more than it builds, but in that breaking is the shape of eternity being formed. God does not choose people for their comfort. He chooses them for their capacity to carry what others cannot, to endure what others avoid, and to walk where others would turn back. Look at those in history who bore the mark of being chosen. None of them were strangers to hardship. Abraham was asked to leave everything he knew. Joseph was betrayed and imprisoned. Moses was burdened with a people who constantly doubted him. David spent years hiding in caves, not reigning in palaces. Mary was chosen to carry the Savior, but also to watch him suffer. Peter was told he would one day stretch out his hands and be led where he did not want to go. These were not easy roads, but they were holy ones. Comfort is not the proof of calling, faithfulness is. The one who is chosen will often wonder why they are suffering more, not less. Why doors seem to close, why battles seem to multiply, why prayers go unanswered. But that is the very evidence of being molded. God's chosen are not set apart for leisure. They are set apart for purpose. And purpose, in the kingdom of God, is forged through surrender, not ease. Every trial, every heartbreak, every delayed answer is part of the process. The chosen ones are not victims of fate. They are vessels being shaped by the hand of the potter. The wheel spins, the hands press, and the clay groans. But something eternal is being formed. The world often mocks the chosen because it cannot understand them. Their path does not follow the rules of success or pleasure. They may be rejected, misunderstood, or forgotten. But they are not lost. They walk a different road, one paved with trust, not recognition. Their strength is not their own. Their wisdom is not their own. Even their hope, at times, is borrowed from the one who walks beside them unseen. The chosen walk with a limp, like Jacob, who wrestled with God. They bleed with questions but do not let go. They fall, but they rise again. Not because they are strong, but because they are held. To be chosen is not to be above suffering. It is to be transformed by it. The chosen are those whom God trusts with trials. Not because they are worthy, but because He knows what He can accomplish through them. He allows storms not to destroy, but to deepen. He permits sorrow not to crush, but to cleanse. And in the end, the chosen bear a different kind of glory. Not the glory of comfort, but the glory of communion. They know God not just through His gifts, but through His groanings, not only in His power, but in His pain. Sometimes the weight of being chosen is felt most deeply in the silence of God. When prayers echo without response, when the heavens feel closed, when faith feels like walking through fog. In those moments, the chosen must learn to walk by trust, not sight. They must learn to sing, even when the song sounds hollow. They must believe that obedience matters more than understanding. The world may call this foolishness, but heaven calls it worship. The truth is, being chosen by God is a kind of holy suffering. Not the suffering of punishment, but the suffering of purification. It is a calling that does not always make life easier, but always makes life more eternal. The chosen are not marked by their comfort. They are marked by their cross. And the cross, though heavy, leads always to resurrection. Faithfulness is the only proof of being chosen. Not feelings, not outward blessings, not spiritual language or experiences, faithfulness. The chosen are not known by how loudly they speak or how visibly they shine, but by how deeply they remain. Remaining is the sign. Remaining when it's dark, when the road is dry, when the heavens are silent. Anyone can follow when the way is lit and the crowd is cheering. But the chosen follow when the crowd has scattered and the lights have gone out. The test of chosenness is not in moments of glory, but in seasons of silence. It is in the ordinary obedience, the secret surrender, the quiet loyalty to God when no one sees and nothing seems to change. There is something deeply spiritual about staying. The chosen ones are those who stay at the feet of the Master, even when they don't understand His methods. They don't always feel victorious, but they remain committed. They don't always feel strong, but they return to the altar. Even when their prayers seem unanswered, they still pray. Even when their hearts feel dry, they still show up. Not because it feels good, but because it is right. That is faithfulness. That is chosenness. Emotion can come and go. Revelation can stir and fade. But faithfulness digs deep and holds on, not to experience but to covenant. Many want the identity of being chosen, but not the endurance it requires. They want to be known as the called of God, but they don't want to carry the burden of obedience. Being chosen means little if it's not proven in choices. The choices you make in the dark, the choices you make when no one claps, the choices you make when your own heart feels weary and confused. The chosen aren't perfect, but they return. They fall, but they get up. They wrestle with God, but they refuse to walk away. Their loyalty is not loud, but it is lasting. This is where many misunderstand what it means to belong to God. They assume that if they are chosen, life should be smoother. That door should open, prayers should be answered quickly, and success should follow. But chosenness is not about a life without pressure. It's about a life that remains faithful under pressure. The chosen don't chase signs. They follow the one who gives them. They don't demand proof at every step. They walk forward with trust, even when the next step feels invisible. They may feel fear, but they do not turn back. They may face confusion, but they do not forsake the path. Think of Noah building an ark with no rain. Think of Abraham walking with a knife toward the mountain. Think of Job worshipping with a broken body and shattered heart. These are not stories of emotional clarity or perfect peace. They are stories of faithfulness. Stories of chosen souls who stayed true when everything around them screamed to quit. That is the pattern of those God calls His own. Not flawless heroes, but faithful servants. Not loud proclaimers, but quiet walkers who keep walking even when the trail disappears. Jesus never said, "Well felt, good and faithful servant." He said, "Well done." Faithfulness is not measured in passion, but in practice. The daily yes, the small obediences, the steady steps. These are the echoes of divine chosenness. The one who stays close to God's heart is the one who understands that presence is more powerful than performance. That clinging is more holy than clarity. That loving God in the mystery is richer than loving Him in the miracle. Being chosen by God is not about what you say you believe. It's about how you live when belief feels thin. It's about whether you choose integrity when compromise would be easier. Whether you love others when bitterness feels justified. Whether you forgive when your heart aches for revenge. These acts of faithfulness may look small in the eyes of the world, but in heaven they shine brighter than gold. The chosen ones aren't the loudest. They are the ones who have learned to endure, to weep and still worship, to lose and still love, to wait and still trust. They don't need the world's affirmation because they've heard God's whisper. They don't give up because they know their name is written on hands that were pierced for them. They don't run ahead because they've learned to walk with the one who walks at a different pace. The chosen prove who they are not by what they say, but by how they stay. Every soul is being reached, but not every soul is listening. This is one of the most sobering realities of human existence. The voice of God is not distant, not reserved for the few, not limited to prophets or saints. It calls out to every soul over and over, often in ways unnoticed by the senses, but deeply felt by the heart. That voice can arrive in a moment of stillness when everything else falls quiet. It can press itself into a question that refuses to go away or stir in the ache that lingers after a loss. God's reach is constant and unrelenting, but always gentle. It does not force its way in. It stands at the door and knocks. Many imagine that God speaks only to the righteous or the religious. But He speaks to the weary, the skeptical, the broken, the distracted. The call of God is not reserved for those who have cleaned themselves up. It is extended even to those still running. The tragedy is not that He doesn't reach us. The tragedy is that many simply do not recognize His hand when it touches their life. The noise of the world is loud and persistent, and most hearts have become so entangled in it that the quiet approach of the divine goes unnoticed. The human heart has grown used to flashing lights and instant gratification. It does not always have the patience for a whisper, even when that whisper is holy. God reaches through the ordinary. through closed doors and unexpected delays, through gentle reminders and haunting questions, through a friend's comment or a verse that won't let go. These are not random, they are signs, and yet, because they are subtle, they are often dismissed. We look for God in drama, in miracles, in big moments. But He most often comes in the still, small voice. The problem is never the absence of signs. It is the absence of attention. The signs are there, but we are not looking. Or worse, we see them and refuse to respond. There is a difference between being reached and being awakened. Many are being reached. God is always initiating, always pursuing, but awakening depends on response, and response requires humility. The one who insists on certainty before surrender may never surrender at all. God is not asking for instant understanding. He is asking for trust. The light doesn't flood the whole room at once. It begins with one candle, one moment of recognition, one choice to turn and look. From that the journey begins, but it must begin. Too many linger at the threshold, feeling the stir but never stepping forward. To be chosen is not merely to be called, it is to answer. The invitation is wide, but the path narrows by each person's willingness to walk it. God's love is not absent from the one who ignores Him, but that love cannot shape a life that resists it. There is a difference between being loved and being led. God loves everyone, but He leads only those who follow, and following Him means listening, truly listening, not just once, but continuously. His voice does not always say what we want to hear. Sometimes it confronts, sometimes it convicts, but always it calls us home. The greatest danger is not that God will stop reaching, but that we will stop noticing. The human soul can grow numb. It can be hardened by disappointment, dulled by sin, distracted by comfort. And when that happens, the reach of God feels more like a shadow than a light. Not because He has moved away, but because we have stopped turning toward Him. Over time, that lack of response becomes a habit, then a posture, then a condition. The voice still calls, but the ears have grown deaf. Yet even in that silence, even in that numbness, God continues to reach. A restless night, an unshakable thought, a deep longing that won't leave. These are not random. They are God's fingers gently tapping on the locked door of the heart. And still, many turn away. Some delay, saying they will return later. Others are afraid of what surrender might mean. Still others are simply too busy to care. But the invitation remains. The hand is still extended. To be among the chosen is to be among those who answer that reach with openness, not perfection. It is to say yes even when the future is unclear, to follow even when the way is hard. The chosen are not the most religious or the most moral. They are simply the most responsive. They feel the reach and they reach back. They listen. And in listening, they are transformed. God is always reaching. The only question is whether we are listening. The calling of God is not distant thunder. It is a present whisper. It is not reserved for the extraordinary, but extended to the willing. To be chosen is not to be elevated above others, but to be drawn into a deeper surrender, a sacred responsibility. The signs are everywhere. The invitation is constant, and the hand of heaven is reaching still. But the clock is ticking, not because God's mercy runs dry, but because our hearts grow dull with delay. The chosen are those who listen when others ignore, who stay when others drift, who respond even when the path is costly. You are not waiting on God. He is waiting on you. The question is not whether He is reaching out. The question is, will you reach back before the last 45 minutes run out.